Howdy folks, it's Will here from Flow Mountain Bike and welcome to this video review of the new Giant Anthem. Now, the Anthem is Giant's flagship cross-country race bike, and it's been totally overhauled this year with a brand new frame and key updates to the geometry. It also gets an increase in suspension travel with 110mm at the front and 100mm at the rear. Perhaps the biggest change on the Anthem is its move away from the iconic Maestro suspension design to a simpler and lighter single pivot platform which Giant calls FlexPoint Pro. That's helped shave around 250 grams off the old frame, which is particularly impressive given that the new bike is much slacker and longer than before, and Giant also claims it's stiffer too. There are 3 Anthem models for 2022, and the bike that we've been testing is the mid-spec option. It's the Giant Anthem Advanced Pro 29.1. Current pricing on this bike is $9,299 Australian dollars. It comes with a full carbon fibre frame, the updated Fox Live Valve 1.5 suspension system with a 34-step cast fork up front. There's a Shimano XT group set, Giant's new XCR carbon wheel set, and Maxxis Recon Race 2.4-inch wide trail tyres. Confirmed weight for our medium-sized test bike without pedals and with the tyres set up tubeless is 11.3 kilos. Now, it's not the lightest XC bike we've tested, but it's still quite impressive given it comes with 125mm dropper post, big tyres and 110mm travel fork. The Fox Live Valve system does add some weight too. The rear shock is nearly double the weight of a standard Fox Float DPS shock, and along with the battery and controller, you're looking at around a 300 to 400 gram weight penalty over a standard fork and shock. The new Anthem frame is very light though. Confirmed weight for the frame with a float DPS shock is just 1800 grams on the nose, and that makes this one of the lightest full suspension frames on the market. Now, I started testing out this bike a few months ago prior to the official launch, but unfortunately I cracked the chainstay on the original frame during a test ride where I bottomed out the shock after landing off a small jump. The frame went back to Taiwan for assessment, and Giant determined that the crack was caused by damage outside of a riding scenario and not the result of a manufacturing defect. I hadn't crashed the bike and I don't recall any significant rock strikes, so that does leave things somewhat up in the air as to the root cause behind that failure. While the original frame was being assessed, Giant sent out a replacement frame set in order for us to carry out the testing process. I swapped all the parts over to the new frame, and I've been riding and racing this bike ever since without issue. At 175 centimeters tall, I've been riding a medium size in the Giant Anthem. It fits pretty well, but it's got quite a long and low riding position out of the box, so I did end up fitting a slightly shorter 60mm stem in order to bring the bars back a touch. After some experimentation with the suspension setup, I ended up settling on 26% sag for the rear shock. Now, it is possible to run more sag and lean on the Live Valve system in order to provide pedaling support. The problem with going too soft though is you end up with a bigger difference between the open and firm suspension settings, with the rear shock behaving more like a trapdoor, causing a significant weight shift on the trail. For cross-country racing, you want the suspension to be predictable and the riding position to be consistent. And I found that lifting sag to that 25 to 26% mark helped to achieve that feel. The new Live Valve 1.5 system offers way more tuning options than the original. You now have 5 suspension modes to choose from, and most of those modes have a further 5 levels of sensitivity. The climb mode is particularly interesting. When the system detects that you're climbing, it firms up the rear shock a little more than normal, and it leaves the fork open to steepen the head angle and improve your climbing position. It works well for much longer and smoother climbs, but personally I found the uneven performance between the fork and shock to be more of a hindrance on technical climbs. There's also the new comfort mode, which allows the suspension to open up more easily and remain open for longer. We found this to be a great setting for the Trance 29, but it is less applicable to the racier Anthem. After testing out all of the options, I settled on using either the sport mode for riding more technical and rocky trails, or the firm mode for racing on smoother courses. Either way, it's great to have all of those tuning options available, and it must be said that this is the app that Fox should have launched Live Valve to begin with. As to how the new Giant Anthem rides on the trail, with its up-to-date geometry and its contemporary parts package, this bike offers terrific all-round handling and especially at speed. It's noticeably more solid and sure-footed than its predecessor, which largely boils down to the longer wheelbase and the stiffer chassis. There's more grounded stability at race pace, with less twisting and unwanted flex when loading the bike up through high-speed bank turns. The Fox 34 Stepcast is a brilliant performer, and it's proving to be a superb match for the new breed of modern angled cross-country race bikes. It's got great small bump sensitivity, but it also manages its travel well on bigger hits with way less flex than the old 32 Stepcast. The rear suspension offers similarly refined small bump sensitivity with a nice balance between comfort and stability. Put into context, it's much smoother than a Canyon Lux and the Trek Super Caliber, but it's not as plush as a Scott Spark or the Cannondale Scalpel. It is comfortable to ride over rough terrain though, and there is sufficient progression to avoid blowing through the travel on bigger hits. It's not quite as active under braking as the old bike, and I found on loose descents I was more likely to lock up the rear tyre during panic braking. However, those beefier chainstays are much stiffer laterally, and combined with the shorter rear centre length, this bike is more responsive during quick changes of direction. I also have to say that the new Live Valve system is a big contributor to this bike's overall performance. Now, you don't strictly need Live Valve. I did spend a bit of time riding the Anthem with the Live Valve system switched off, and it's absolutely fine. It pedals pretty well. The thing is though, it's just much better with it switched on. Of course, pedal efficiency steps up a few notches, but the biggest difference is the improved climbing stability that it brings to the party. Now, I won't go into heaps of detail about how it works because there's a load more information in the full review over at flowmountainbike.com. If you've not checked it out yet, make sure you click that link in the video description below. In a nutshell, Live Valve uses a variety of sensors on the bike to determine whether the fork and shock should be in one of two settings, open or firm. It's worth noting that the firm position isn't a full lockout. There are a few millimeters of movement there until you hit a firm platform, which prevents the fork and shock from sinking into their travel. This prevents the seat angle from slackening out on the climbs, keeping you in a more efficient pedaling position. The taller ride height also gives you more clearance underneath the bottom bracket, which is an absolute boon when you're heading up awkward rock gardens. Combined with that initial shock sensitivity and the grippy high volume rubber, the Anthem is a terrific technical climber. It responds really well to dynamic riding, which is especially beneficial for XC racing, where you're in and out of the saddle, moving around the cockpit, attacking the descents and sprinting on the flats. When Live Valve does open up the suspension to absorb an impact, it closes quickly in order to counter your body's weight shift. This reduces that oscillation effect that happens after each bump, so you're not diving around like a dolphin. There have also been updates to the damping internals, which is particularly noticeable in the open mode. My experience of testing previous Live Valve bikes was that they were often sticky and over-damped in the open mode. And that hasn't been the case with the new Trance 29 or the Anthem, which feel considerably plusher and more active overall. Along with the updated sensors and the speed of the Live Valve system, the transition between the open and firm modes is totally seamless on the trail. It's basically unnoticeable for the rider and certainly less noticeable than the brain shock on the Specialized Epic. All that electronic wizardry does result in a bit of clutter on the Anthem, and the battery also isn't in the most aesthetically pleasing position. Also, as I mentioned before, the suspension is never fully locked out with Live Valve. This differs to an Orbea Oise or the Trek Super Caliber, both of which can be turned into fully rigid bikes at the flick of a lockout lever. How much of a difference that makes to efficiency is debatable, but needless to say, if you desperately want that fully locked out feel, you won't find it with Live Valve. And as seamless as it is on the trail, there are occasions where Live Valve doesn't open up where you might want it to, which is more so the case with the fork. This is because the sensors are responding to bump acceleration, so the harder you ride, the more likely you are to trigger the sensors and open up the suspension. And that's fine when you're full of energy, but deeper into a race when I was starting to fatigue and ride less aggressively off the back of the bike, I found I wasn't pushing the front wheel hard enough to always open up the fork. For that reason, I was occasionally wishing for manual control over the live valve settings. Now you can turn the system off and change modes via the controller on the battery, but it is upside down and facing away from you, making it really awkward to do while riding. It's worth pointing out that RockShox does have a manual override function with its new flight attendant system, which you can engage via the left-hand controller. That could be an interesting addition to live valve, with a discrete switch at the handlebar for turning the system on and off while you're riding. Of course, the real beauty about the live valve system though is that you don't have to think about toggling any switches or levers in the first place. You just ride, safe in the knowledge that you'll never accidentally leave the suspension locked out on a descent, and there's a definite psychological advantage that comes from knowing that your suspension is about as efficient as it can be all the time. Now, aside from the issue we had with our original frame, we've had few problems with the Anthem test bike. The XCR wheel set has been a particular standout. These are very responsive and lightweight at just 1,531 grams, and that 30mm internal rim width provides the perfect platform for the excellent 2.4-inch Maxxis tyres. The XT group set has performed well, though the shifting has been a little lackluster due to the curious choice of a KMC chain. Otherwise, all the Giant branded kit has performed well, and I'm especially glad to see a dropper post spec'd on every model. The frame is finished nicely with its sparkly paint job and the soft density chainstay protector. I also appreciated the bolt-in cable ports during the frame swap, which involved a full live valve lobotomy. Perhaps one of the few downsides of the Anthem is the fact that it will only fit a single bottle. Now that's fine for XCO racing, but given that almost every new XC bike on the market will now take 2 bottles, it's becoming an increasingly desirable feature for marathon racing and long-distance trail riding. Indeed, it may actually make the Anthem a non-starter for some. As to how the Giant Anthem compares to some of the competition, we've also been spending a load of time on the new Scott Spark, and there are quite a few similarities between these two bikes, but there are also some key differences too. The Spark has more suspension, it has an adjustable head angle, and it also uses the twin lock remote to offer the rider manual control over its suspension behaviour. For more information about how the two bikes compare on the trail, make sure you click that link in the video description below to check out the full review. And that, folks, brings us neatly to the verdict of the new Giant Anthem. Well, this is a truly modern XC bike built for modern XC riding. Not only has Giant produced a lighter and simpler bike to its predecessor, it's also brought the geometry right up to date. Along with the increase in travel and the brilliant parts package, the Anthem is an exceptionally capable and well-rounded race bike. We've also been thoroughly impressed with the new generation Fox live valve system, which offers better reactivity and a more seamless transition on the trail. It brings improved efficiency and stability to the Anthem platform, and while it does add expense, weight and clutter, in my opinion, the advantages far outweigh the negatives. The only real fly in the ointment was the fact that our original frame cracked, the reason for which remains largely unknown. Perhaps this simply serves to highlight the reality that while carbon fibre can be incredibly strong and durable for its intended purpose, it can also be easy to damage in freak accidents that occur outside of that remit. And as unfortunate as it was, I've not had any issues with the replacement frame set, despite putting it through a lot of hard riding and racing during that time. It certainly can't dampen my experience of testing the Anthem, which stands as one of the best performing cross-country bikes currently on the market. Now, as mentioned before, there is a load more detail in the full review over at flowmountainbike.com. Make sure you click that link in the video description below to see the full review of the Giant Anthem. If you've got any questions for me about the Anthem, make sure you drop those into the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Otherwise, that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video review and I'll see you next time. Tooroo!